So I have talked at great length about the biking infrastructure out here in the Netherlands, but I haven't really spent enough time speaking about the quality of the bicycles themselves in the Netherlands as compared to the United States of America. And it's important that I touch on this because the bikes themselves are actually a big part of the biking experience. Even with this amazing biking infrastructure, if you don't have the right kind of bike, you're not really going to be able to benefit from the infrastructure as much as you would with a good bike. And I actually learned this very recently when we relocated from Brabant to Gelderland. The first thing that we did was we went to the local bike shop and we rented two bikes. I rented out a bike for myself and my girlfriend, and the bikes just so happen to be Gazelle brand. And this is not a sponsored post. I am not affiliated in any way with Gazelle, but I will say that this is by far the best bike I have ever ridden in my life. Now, the bike I'm going to be showing you today is my girlfriend's bike, and that's for a very particular reason, which you will learn about later on in this video. But that said, let me go ahead and show you this bike so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So like I said, this bike is a Gazelle bike, but the features on this bike, generally speaking, are going to be present on most Dutch bikes. Most Dutch bikes that I've seen, at the very least, are going to have most, if not all, of these features. The main difference is just going to be the build quality and the overall riding experience, because these Gazelle bikes are definitely very, very smooth. They're very smooth, they're very easy to ride, just very good bikes overall. That said, the first feature of Dutch bikes that I never saw on American bikes back home is this right here. And you're gonna have to forgive me because I can't really demonstrate how it works because I'm filming. But basically, these key locks right here are something that you never really see in American bicycles. As a matter of fact, I didn't know that that even existed until I relocated to the Netherlands. So maybe you're wondering, well, how do Americans lock their bikes up? Well, we lock our bikes up with the chain locks. So basically, you have the little chain with the combination or the key, and you either attach it to the frame of the bike or the wheel of the bike, and then you attach that to the bike rack. But I found that this is much more convenient because, as far as I'm aware, unless somebody is willing to pretty much disassemble the whole entire bike, they are not going to be able to steal your bike. Because basically the way that this works, if you're not aware, if you're an American watching this, is that when you take this key out, and again, I can't really demonstrate this because I'm holding the camera, but when you take this key out, the back wheel does not move. It doesn't move, it doesn't budge. So your only option at that point would be to literally pick the bike up and put it in the back of a van or a truck or something like that, which for one would be very, very conspicuous. And that's not something that you would generally want to do if you value, I don't know, your freedom. But at the same time, it would just be very, very inconvenient to have to go through the process of, again, maybe taking off the back wheel and disassembling the whole entire bike from the frame, disassembling the frame from the wheel, that is, in order to steal the bike. And then even at that point, you just have part of a bike or parts of a bike. So that's definitely a very unique feature. The way that this typically works is you move this down. So you turn the key, just visualize this in your mind. You turn this key right here, and while it's turned, you move this down, and from there you can actually pull the key out and the bike is locked, and the bike will not operate. It won't move until you put the key back in. And when you put the key back in and you twist it, this is going to automatically pop up, unless it's like the bike that I used to have back in Brabant and the thing just gets stuck, which is definitely very inconvenient, speaking from first-hand experience with that. But I digress. That key lock is a very, very great feature. I will say that it can be inconvenient if you lose the key. There was a time when my girlfriend and I, we were at the local swimming pool and we were in the bike parking lot, and this girl came out crying, borderline hysterical. And we asked her if she was okay. We didn't know what was going on with her. It's just this little girl. And between her gasps and her sobs and all of that, she managed to tell my girlfriend in Dutch that she had lost the key, the slow tool, to her bike. And honestly, when she said that, I almost started crying with her, because I was like, man, I don't know what to tell you with that. But actually, I spoke about this in a previous video, and somebody commented that if that does happen, you can bring the bike to the bike shop that you purchased the bike from, and they can get that situated for you. But it's still very inconvenient, especially if you're not close to a bike shop. And I don't know that particular area very well, but I didn't recall seeing a bike shop anywhere nearby. Granted, she ended up finding her key, so it all worked out in the end. But I can imagine for those 20 minutes or so, she was absolutely petrified, and I completely understand why. So it's definitely imperative that you keep that key on your person, either in your pocket, in your bag, wherever. You keep that near you at all times, and you do not lose it. You put it on your keychain, wherever you have to put it. You just have to make sure you don't lose it. And if you can just do that, then I think that that is a much better way of securing your bicycle than the chain lock. Now, the next feature of Dutch bikes that I never really saw back home, especially for casual cyclists, meaning people who don't ride those $10,000 street bikes for leisure, but people who actually ride bikes to commute, which is very rare back home, by the way, but I still never saw this on those kinds of bikes, is lights. So as you can see, you have a front light right here, and you have a rear light right here. And the way that these lights work is, I don't exactly know how they managed to pull this off, some sort of engineering trick, I imagine, but basically the lights turn on when you start cycling, which is mind-blowing to me. I never saw that back home. I definitely never had a bike like that back home, but these lights are very convenient, because back home all we really had on our bikes were the reflectors. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, basically within the wheel you would have these little white things that look kind of like lights, but they don't turn on. And the only real purpose that they serve is when a car has its headlights on and the light from its headlights catches the reflectors, it illuminates the wheels. But even with that, a lot of times you're kind of just invisible at night. And I know this because I've almost been hit a couple of times by cars at night. But that has yet to happen here because we have lights. Now, it is important to understand that these lights sometimes stop working. And when they stop working, I don't really know how you can go about fixing them. The best solution that I'm aware of is to simply go to Albert Heijn or Action or a similar store like that, and you just purchase more lights. So you can actually purchase lights that you would put right here on the handlebars or on the back. But the key is, if that light stops working, if either of them stop working, you have to make sure that you replace them in due time. Otherwise, if the police see you without the lights at night, they will pull you over. How do I know this? Because it happened to me. A couple of weeks ago, I was riding my bicycle, the bike that I had back in Brabant, and the light, the rear light in particular, was not functioning. And it just so happened that as I was riding back from Albert Heijn with my girlfriend, the police were right there. And they didn't even flash their lights, they just rolled their window down and started talking to me. And basically, they told me that I had to get off of the bike and walk back, or they were gonna give me a ticket. And I was grateful that they didn't give me a ticket right away, because I kind of knew that I wasn't supposed to be doing it. But at the same time, I was sort of just trying to hold off on it, because honestly, I do see a lot of people out here ride without the lights. I know it's dangerous. I know I shouldn't do that, and I wouldn't recommend that you do that. But I guess I was just being cheap. I was just being stingy, and I didn't want to get another light. But this bike right here, the light works perfectly fine. And actually, fun fact, for whatever reason, the next day after I got pulled over, my light started working again. I don't know what happened. I don't know how that happened. You can call that serendipity, luck, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. It just started working again. So I was really grateful for that. Didn't have to worry about getting pulled over or buying a new light. But with a bike like this, the light is going to work pretty much. I don't know if it'll work into perpetuity, but I haven't had any issues with this whatsoever. Again, it's a rental bike, so I don't know how old it is or anything like that. But the bike is definitely just a better build quality in general. So I imagine that the lights also fall into that good build quality, but it's definitely convenient to have. And with this particular bike, you can flip it on and off. But again, for a lot of bikes, they simply turn on when you start pedaling, which is pretty crazy. Pretty crazy in my personal opinion. Definitely something that I never saw back home. And speaking of things that I never saw back home, the next feature of bicycles out here that I never saw back home is simply the variety. Now, I don't have a way of showing you this because I just have this bike right here. I have this bike, and then I have the bike that I'm renting myself, but they're very similar bikes. They're still regular bikes. But out here, you see bikes that you would literally never see back home. What do I mean by that? Well, here, just to give you an example, they have these things called bakfiets or bakfietsen. I don't know how you would say it, but if you're Dutch, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're American, you have no clue what I'm talking about because we definitely don't have them back home. So basically, a bakfiets, I'll probably put a screenshot on the screen, but just to describe it for you, a bakfiets is a bicycle with cargo in the front. So you have this big cargo thing in the front that you can literally fit a whole human being inside of. In fact, a lot of times when people have bakfiets, what they do is they allow their children to ride in the little cargo container in the front. Now, is that safe? I mean, I guess it's probably safer than allowing your children to ride on the back of the bike, which I see that as well. And if you're doing that, if you do that with your children, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it, but it's definitely probably a little more risky than just letting them ride their own bikes if they're of age. But I don't know, I could be completely wrong about that. What I do know is that bakfiets are very unique, and it's something that you just don't see back home. You will never see a bakfiets anywhere back home, especially in Texas. As a matter of fact, I don't know if they're produced back home, and if they are produced, I don't know if they're legal. I don't know if you'd legally be allowed to actually ride a bike like that. So just the variety of bicycles that you see out here. They also have fat bikes. I think maybe we have fat bikes back home. I just never saw them. A fat bike is sort of this electric bike with these very fat tires. I don't really know how to explain it. I'll just put a screenshot on the screen of that as well. But it's definitely very interesting to see how much more variety they have in bicycles. Even just the distinction between male and female bikes, which is the next thing that I've noticed about Dutch bikes, is that the majority of bikes that you're going to see out here are going to be female bikes. What does that mean? Because I didn't know what that meant when I went to buy my first bike out here. So basically, as you can see, this bike right here has this curve. So the frame curves downward, which makes it very easy to access. It's much more accessible for most people. And honestly, I don't know why they don't just make every bike like this. The bike that I'm renting, which is a male bike, quote unquote, is sort of like this one. The only difference is that the frame just kind of comes straight across like a regular bike. But other than that, they're literally the same exact bike. Same exact bike, same exact riding experience. But I never really saw bikes like this back home, or if I did, they were beach cruisers or things like that, that were literally catered only to women. So this bike right here, if you see me riding this, you're not really gonna think twice about it. But if you see me riding a white and pink and aqua blue bike, you're probably going to make some assumptions about me, but I won't get into that. The point that I'm making is that most people out here actually ride the female bikes. And again, I think that all bikes should be like that. I don't really see the advantage of having the male bike other than maybe being able to put a cup holder or something like that. But even then, you could probably put one right here. So I don't know. To me, this is safer because let's say, for example, if you were in a situation where you needed to bail really quickly, it's much easier to get off of a bike like this than it is to get off of the male bike. And I definitely feel safer riding this one, which is why I let my girlfriend ride this one. But it's definitely something that I never really saw back home, at least as far as I can recall, is just the prevalence of female bikes and it actually being the most typical form of bike. Now, the next thing that I see on Dutch bikes that I rarely saw back home, this is something that I did see, but it was very rare, is the prevalence of baskets on bikes. So obviously this bike right here doesn't have a basket, unfortunately. It would be really nice if it did have a basket. It would make taking groceries back to the Airbnb a lot easier. But I digress. A lot of bikes here are going to have a basket either in the front, so from the handlebars, or back here on this little cargo storage area. And again, I find this to be really, really convenient when you do have it. I've never had a bike here in the Netherlands, at least, or back home in the US, that had the basket. The only time I ever had a bike like that was when I was using the Velen BC bikes back in Valencia, Spain. And I really, really found that to be super convenient. And I think that, again, every bike should have that. I don't really see the advantage of not having it other than, I guess, lower weight. But I mean, a basket is so lightweight and so convenient that, I don't know. I think, once again, every single bike should have it. Every single bike should have it. But obviously, like I said, this one doesn't have it, unfortunately. But it's very useful, and I think it just more so speaks volumes to the fact that Dutch people don't just ride bikes for the sake of leisure. You've probably seen some people riding bikes for leisure in the background of this video. But by and large, people here tend to ride bikes for practical reasons. They're riding bikes for transportation, to get from point A to point B, to go and get groceries, to go and pick up the kids, etc. So having a basket is just a natural byproduct of that. Whereas back home, I mean, a lot of times you don't even have bike parking at the grocery stores. So it's like, how are you going to bike to the grocery store? Where are you going to chain your bike to? You only have the chain lock and you don't have anything to chain it to. And some plazas, some complexes, the strip malls, don't even allow you to really ride bikes through the parking lot. So that's a whole different discussion for a whole different day. But it just definitely goes to show that Dutch people ride bikes with a different intention, with a different context than their American counterparts. That said, because Dutch people tend to rely so heavily on bicycles, Dutch bicycles tend to be more expensive. They do tend to be a lot more expensive than American bikes. Now, it is possible that I'm just out of tune. It's possible that I'm out of tune, out of touch with the American bike market, if there even really is one. But I will say that Dutch bikes tend to be, on average, probably anywhere from 250 to 350 euros, which maybe if you're Dutch, you might not think that that's a lot, but back home, where most of the bikes that I rode tended to be very cheap, that's pretty expensive. That's pretty expensive to someone like me. So it's definitely a bit painful to have to spend that kind of money. I actually, once again, rented these two bikes. So I think I spent 240 euros for the whole month, which really isn't that bad if you think about it, especially for the quality of the bikes. But to buy a bike like this, to actually purchase a bike like this, and listen, if you have a bike like this, correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe if you can get a very old one, you might be able to get one for cheaper. But I'd imagine a high-end bike like this is probably upwards of 450 euros. That's going to set you back 450 euros. But the caveat to this is a bike like this will very likely last you for at least 10 years. At least 10 years. So if you think about the overall cost that you're incurring from cycling, even if you account for the servicing, you're probably still going to come away better in the long term by having a Dutch bike. It's just like with, let's say, for example, clothing. If you buy higher quality clothes and you spend a little bit more on them and they last you longer, you actually end up saving money in the long run. But up front, Dutch bikes are definitely going to set you back probably twice as much as your average American bike, but you do get what you pay for.